Welcome to 3S. 3S is a system rooted in ancient history and guided by modern technology. It is the combination of all ancient wisdom teachings refined through experimental science. It is intuition proven by mechanics. It's one world described simultaneously as both purely material and wholly spiritual. My name is Shiva, and I'll be your guide through the ancient hidden symbolism that links science with spirituality. Walk with me as we explore a perspective that turns our view of the universe inside out.
Whether you find yourself to be a hardline materialist, or you believe more in the primacy of spirit and consciousness, one of the things that we all have in common is this one thing. The world is not the simple, straightforward thing it initially seems to be. While current attempts at a scientific perspective of consciousness and spirit is usually scoffed at by the more materialist crowd, what you'll actually find here with 3S is that it is the more spiritual crowd who will be the ones who are more closed-minded. Proponents at both ends of the spectrum are very well aware of how their particular viewpoints have their own specific advantages. However, this artificial schism between these two sides is standing in the way of a greater understanding. In fact, it has an analogy in the human brain where the two halves of the brain don't communicate properly, and often that is found alongside psychosis. So what I'm saying here is that as a species, we almost have a psychosis when we separate our spiritual and our materialistic worldviews. What we're attempting to do here is to bring them together into one greater mutually dependent whole. Today, I specifically want to speak to those who embrace spirituality. I want you to open your mind to what you typically might think of as closed-mindedness. I want you to recognize that there's some possibility that you've been hammered at so much by the ideas of logical and rational that perhaps you developed a little bit of a pushback against it. Rightfully so. A lot of times there's kind of an arrogance that comes from that side because, well, there's been some scientific and mathematical things that, have proven themselves out. And so their success has made them a little overbearing. I think, however, there may have been sort of a reaction to that. And so that while we can see that perhaps this one side doesn't integrate enough of our ideas, perhaps we also in the spiritual side don't integrate enough of these other ideas. So I want you to consider that and say to yourself, perhaps we can pull in a little more of that rational, logical, what we think of as materialism and almost in this negative idea of closed-mindedness, and try to take some of the best ideas, take the baby, forget the bathwater, we know it's there, but take the baby out of the bathwater and reintegrate that into this mutually dependent whole that we all try to build. To begin down this path, I'd like to ask you a few questions. When a mother is feeding her child, is she selfishly maximizing her genes, or is she selflessly engaged in an act of pure love? Why can't it be both at the same time? Is it possible that there is a mechanical, materialistic, gray and lifeless sort of perspective that is actually true and valuable about all of reality? That it is explaining one facet of a multifaceted truth. That it is actually factually true, but it's just one perspective. And that there's a lot of ways that you can slice the pie, and there are a lot of ways in which there are truths. Is it possible that those who are in the spiritual community, those who are spiritually minded, sometimes might throw away the baby with the bathwater? So ask yourself, do the facts of survival make the mother any less beautiful at all? And would a mechanical, even deterministic view, we hate that word, don't we? Would a mechanical view of spirituality make it any less holy? Or is it possible that you could have a mechanics of spirit that is just one facet of a multifaceted truth? Perhaps this additional perspective is one that cannot be ignored and certainly should not be discarded. Perhaps it is a missing half to our whole. So let me first start down this path by speaking on the utility and usefulness of the concept of separation. Now I know if you're the spiritually minded folks, then you're going to have an idea of separation that is negative. It's not, it's a bad thing. We know that separation is an illusion. We all know that. However, there is a usefulness to the idea of separation, just like I would say there's no real thing as the concept of zero, yet it is useful to have zero in mathematics. Well, the ideas of infinity and things like that, well, it might be useful to have a concept of separation to match those sorts of concepts. Let me use an example of a car engine. Now, the car engine is an analogy that you'll find that I like to use personally very frequently because it has a lot of different uses. For instance, my favorite is the idea of a tangled hierarchy. So, what makes a car go? Is it the engine or is it the fuel? And then, who's in control of a taxi cab? Is it the paying customer or is it the driver? Of course, it's neither. Or is it both? The other concept I like to use the analogy for is the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. If I have given you all the parts to an engine, have I given you an engine? But for now, let's focus on the aspect of the analogy for death itself. When a car dies, it can be just because the timing was off or the engine flooded, something that's basically temporary. Now, the thing is, we actually have that same sort of ambiguity in our concept of death in humans, where sometimes we have sort of suspended animation, we have cells that we can keep alive for periods of time, sometimes we can freeze cells, bring them back to life. But here's the thing, just because an engine has died doesn't mean that you can't just turn it right back on. So we have here an analogy that shows us that there is the ability to start an engine back up. However, there are cases in which once an engine dies, it can't be restarted. It could be a crack in the block or something of that nature. So, to clarify, maybe what we need is two different versions of what death is. So therefore we have death is when the engine simply isn't running, and then we have when the engine has lost the potential to run. So we can turn off an engine and we can turn it on, and what exactly is happening? What's happening is there's a self-perpetuating feedback loop of energy, a balance of energy flowing through material. We have energy flowing through material, or what we have is a motive force going through a guiding principle. And this guiding principle is set up such that there is a feedback loop, there's a cycle, and that cycle is self-perpetuating. So here we have an analogy for life and death in the engine, and the same thing that would apply to cells. Most importantly, of course, though, what we have is an analogy for what life is and why it is that we can have these ambiguous perspectives on what's alive and what is dead. So let's, for now, assume this definition for life, and that is the definition where we say that life is a configuration of material that allows for energy to flow in a cycle that is self-perpetuating. That once we remove the energy, life is no longer there. Just as if we remove the water from a river, the river is no longer really there. It's only the combination of these two things. In simultaneous combination, only then is the whole greater than the sum of its parts. So a cell that is not executing, just like an engine that is not running, is not truly alive, but it's not truly dead unless the potential has been destroyed, unless the configuration of the material that is that guiding principle has been disrupted in some way that it can no longer allow the energy to flow in a self-perpetuating feedback loop. So let's use this definition for life for further explanation. But the question now remains, what exactly is energy? What is it that's flowing in a loop? To answer that question, we're going to have to explore the concept of the luminiferous ether, is what it was once called back during the 1800s. And to understand the ether is to turn your perspective of the universe inside out on the next episode of 3S.
The secrets of the 7 sages have filtered down to us through cultures, mystery religions, and secret societies. Magi have purposely hidden and obscured knowledge deemed too dangerous for the minds of the common people. From the deadly secrecy of the Pythagoreans to the Eleusinian mysteries, like the many parts to an engine, these shattered pieces of knowledge have been preserved but must be reassembled. The leftovers of iconography and metaphor paint a fuzzy blueprint which only now, in the light of modern science and computer technology, can finally be recognized as the parts of some greater workable system of knowledge, an engine of both spiritual and very physically real technology. From the grandest vistas of the spiritual big picture to the deepest technical details of neuroscience and physics, we'll show you a new view of the truth never exposed to the modern public before as we attempt to reunite the divided spirit of our age.